Well, hello again, and welcome back to Conversations with the Dean. I'm delighted today to welcome our guest, Matt Kisber. Matt, welcome to the Lipscomb campus.
Thank you, Turney. It's great to be here and great to be with you.
Great to have you here. Matt has quite a track record and quite a record of achievement. He's the immediate past Commissioner of Economic and Community Development in the state of Tennessee. Prior to that, he was a state legislator. Prior to that, he was part of his family's department store empire in Jackson, Tennessee. But today you're the president and CEO of Silicon Ranch Corporation. So I guess my first question for you, Matt, is tell us about Silicon Ranch. Are you growing silicons or cattle, or what are you growing on the ranch?
Well, we like to think we're growing solar arrays, and our business is one that helps companies in their effort to be green by partnering and deploying what we like to say utility scale solar, 200 kilowatt and larger solar arrays. One of the biggest obstacles to getting solar deployed in our country is the amount of capital it takes to finance it. And most companies have much higher internal rates of return hurdles for their invested capital than what solar would provide them. I mean, as you know, most companies are looking for a 3 to 5 year payback, and solar just doesn't provide that. So we saw a market opportunity to be that third party that can come in and partner with companies, as well as develop our own solar farms, which we are in the process of doing, so that we can help any type of company meet that goal, because sustainability has become such a part of corporate mandates around the country today.
Sure.
So that they can actually turn an opportunity into a revenue generation model where we pay them for hosting our solar arrays, and they can claim the benefits of the being green.
So do they use the electricity that's generated, or do you in turn sell that electricity to others? What's your business model?
It depends. It can be selling it to them, because once you have deployed a solar array, you know what your capital cost is, you know what the revenue model needs to be in order to finance that and make a profit over the 20 or 25 years. But also, many utilities today, like TVA, pay a premium for green power. Here in the TVA Valley region, it's called Generation Partners, and up to 200 kilowatts. So they pay a premium for that green power. So it's more advantageous to sell it into the grid. Could be a time when utility rates have inflated enough that selling it directly to the end user, where policies and laws allow it, would be a more advantageous relationship for both us and for the host. So we can do both, and it is an industry that is in its infancy. And we believe being at the front end of the emergence of this industry affords us the opportunity to help develop the policies and develop the model that I think will become much more common in years to come.
When you were initially describing this just a moment ago, Matt, I think I heard you say that you were focused on large industries as your partners, and that creates a mental image in my mind of large factories, large facilities that have lots of expanse on their roofs, for which you could, I guess, use the facility for the solar array. So is that the strategy to take advantage of those unused spaces?
That's exactly right. I mean, companies today have rooftops that are underutilized. They have excess land that they might be using for buffer, for other purposes. And being able to turn that from an expense into a revenue center is what we help them do while meeting their mandate for sustainability or whatever their efforts around renewable power, renewable generation may be.
Now, you've got a couple of very interesting partners in this venture. Reagan Farr, who was the Commissioner of Revenue, I believe, for the state during the Bredesen administration, one of your peers,
right,
is a partner. But your financial partner, I believe, is the former governor, Phil Bredesen, who I think probably knows a thing or two about successful ventures. He's certainly been successful in his own business career before entering politics. So tell me a little bit about the three of you working together as a team, and tell me why Phil Bredesen is interested in this particular venture.
Absolutely. Reagan and myself worked together under Governor Bredesen, and we're literally partners in the economic development success. I mean, part of Governor Bredesen's strategy was to have all the departments of state government, but especially revenue and ECD, working closely because, as we've talked about many times, customer service and tailoring the incentives and tailoring the offerings to what the company needed was part of what we did. And revenue had a very important role in that with the tools through the tax incentives that were available to us. So taking that same partnership into the private sector was something Reagan and I wanted to do. We thought for some time about what would be the kind of business we would be interested in trying to start together. And what we came to believe was there was a real opening in this market for a company like Silicon Ranch. You have developers who are doing 10 megawatt and bigger utility solar farms in the Southwest, and you have smaller companies that are doing home installation for solar, you know, the 5, 10, 20 kilowatt. But there was this wide opening in that 200 kilowatt to 10 megawatt that range that somebody could really help create the market for. And we thought with our experience in putting together business deals, with our understanding of the solar industry and renewable generation, and quite frankly, the ability to take our current product and try to tailor it to the needs of the host partners with whom we're trying to develop strategic partnerships, made for a great opportunity. We came up with the idea for the company, shared it with Governor Bredesen, who quite frankly was interested in just really mentoring us and couldn't have a better mentor. And as we worked on this over the course of 3 or 4 months with him on weekends, we would meet at Starbucks, as many people know is one of his favorite places, as well as at my house or his house, and he would give us insights and thoughts. By the end of that process, he said, you know, I really think you guys are onto something, and if you'd like, I'd like to join you and be your partner. And we were very excited by that because, as you point out, he's had a very successful career in entrepreneurship, and his insights into growing a company bring an element that neither of us possess, and it's made for a very effective partnership among the three of us.
Tell me what it was like to work for Phil Bredesen. What was his management style?
His management style was, well, first let me say, working for him was a real joy. I learned so much from sitting in the room with him as he would ask questions of either the cabinet or when we were working with prospects, how he would really want to understand what their business model, what their business was about. I mean, we worked with companies that were scientifically oriented, and he would talk about the science of it before we would get into the business of it. Because as many people know, he's a physicist by training. So he's
from Harvard.
From Harvard, that's right. So he's very interested in what's the science of this particular activity. But working with him, his management style is much like you would expect from a CEO. He makes very clear, here are the 3 things that I'm focusing on. And then he expected us as cabinet members to run our departments, but be focused on what he's trying to get accomplished. And, you know, it was basically, you need to make sure your problems don't elevate to me, and you need to be sure that you're running your departments in a manner that's consistent with what I'm trying to accomplish. But he delegated a great deal of responsibility to his commissioners as the operating heads of the 22 departments of state government. And I mean, I remember many, many different conversations, but getting a call from him one morning, and he asked me to come over to his office. He had just come back from a National Governors Conference meeting, and it's where he had heard Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, and Jeff Immelt, the CEO of General Electric, talking about sustainability as an economic development driver. And he had gotten very excited because one of the things they shared, and this is late 2007, early 2008, was that the states that understood that early and developed the tools to attract the industry would be where they plant their seed and grow. And he saw the analogy to the automotive industry in the 70s and 80s with Nissan coming to Tennessee, that if we could do the same thing with renewable energy, solar, wind, biofuels, we could be the place that that industry grew. And with Oak Ridge and the other assets we have, we could combine innovation with manufacturing, and charged me with developing a strategy for accomplishing that, and that's what led to the recruitment of companies like Hemlock and Vocker, multi-billion-dollar investments that will bring other related downstream investments. They make polycrystalline silicon that goes into semiconductors and solar wafers. But that was the strategy. He would always talk about, what are the anchors? What are the anchors that we need to develop around which activity will follow? And if you look at the strategy when he was governor and I was his commissioner, we developed anchors around enhancing the automotive industry, which is a significant player, around the appliance manufacturing industry, food processing, of course, distribution and medical device, healthcare here, and the green energy toolkit, which led to the biofuels, the solar, and the wind, was one of the new anchors that we generated. But he strongly believes if you bring the big projects in, the waves of little projects will follow that have to build on it. The perfect example is the Nissan headquarters. I remember we took a little bit of criticism for the size of the incentive package at the time, $197 million incentive package, most of which were tax credits. But the fact is, 1,300 jobs came to Tennessee, very good, high-paying jobs. And for every Nissan job, according to the research that was done, there would be 10 indirect jobs. And I think we in Middle Tennessee have felt the benefit of the Nissan headquarters being here and the related jobs. But we've also seen other headquarters move in part because I remember people sitting across the table from me saying, if Nissan came here and moved their headquarters from California, there has to be something here that I need to look at. And the net result was we had 52 corporate headquarters in the 8 years Governor Bredesen was in office come and locate in Tennessee. And that was an example of that anchor strategy.
Well, there were several other questions I wanted to ask you about working for Phil Bredesen, but let me delay those just a moment. You've left me with too wide an opening. I just have to, I have to drive through the opening here and ask you about your reaction to the current governor's strategy. I may be misstating this. If I am, correct me, but it appears from the public reports that the current governor, whom we all respect very much, has elected a strategy of focusing on smaller companies and entrepreneurship, creating jobs with the smaller sector companies, as opposed to recruiting the large mega deals like you and Governor Bredesen focused on. Do you agree with the current strategy? Am I misstating it? Is there a place for both?
Well, I think there's a place for both. And each governor has to develop the strategy that's going to be their focus during their time in office. And I think we've seen success. If we look back, Governor Alexander, Governor McWhorter, Governor Sundquist all had different strategies, but Tennessee kept moving forward. And what I hope, and I know Governor Haslam wants to accomplish, is that their strategy helps continue the progress and continues to improve the economy for Tennessee. Supporting existing industry is something every administration has to do. We did it, previous administrations. I applaud them for their focus on it. I hope in that effort, and Governor Haslam has said, I mean, at the business breakfast recently here on campus, he said, we're not turning our back on the big projects, but in this economy, it's a little more challenging and there are not as many of them as what I understood, I think, from your questioning, his answer to be, and I can respect that. Tennessee has one of the best business climates in the country. We in the past have been one of the most competitive states in the country. We need to continue to build on that to afford these opportunities. And the only thing I'd say in closing is, as a retailer, I always knew you got to keep the customers you have, but you have to constantly be working to bring in new customers. And I think that balance is critically important, because if we just focus on who's here, we will never grow to the potential that we all want and expect. So, and I think they know that.
And I guess the converse is true too. If you just focus on recruitment and you don't take care of the companies that are here now,
Absolutely.
in lots of different ways, state government serves the existing base of businesses many different ways, then that doesn't work either. So there's got to be a balance there. Well, we've heard a lot this past summer about jobs at the national level and at the Tennessee level. And you must have some thoughts from your experience at ECD about how jobs are created. You've just talked about what your strategy was. We've talked about what Governor Haslam's strategy is at the state level. If you were advising President Obama, given the circumstances that we're dealing with, which are very, very difficult right now, what would you advise President Obama to do to create jobs at the national level?
Well, first, I think Congress, the White House, they all have to get aligned, and that might be wishing for more. I'm a centrist Democrat. I mean, some of my best friends in the legislature when I served were my fellow colleagues who were Republicans, and I always believed in working across the aisle and trying to accomplish what we could for the good of the state. I'm afraid nationally that spirit is not as prevalent as it might have been a few years ago. But with that said, I think it's time for our country, having had the ability to travel the world as you have and see what so many emerging economies are doing, investing in themselves, with the goal of emulating what we've accomplished in the United States, that we have got to invest in ourselves. We have got to improve our infrastructure. We're going to have to rebuild our electric grid. There's so much that we need to do to modernize our existing infrastructure base, in my opinion, that we could do focused investment that would bring back people to work, that would pay in dividends down the road and help to jumpstart the economy. I'm a big believer that we need to focus on where the growth is going to be and providing the platform for that. And I would hope that President Obama, when he makes his jobs speech, will focus on that. I think about my trips up and down I-40. I'm from Jackson. I spent 20 years driving back and forth, and the amount of truck traffic, I'm told, has more than tripled just, on the Interstate 40 here in Tennessee. The capacity of Interstate 40 hasn't. If we're going to continue to bring in companies that are going to need to bring raw materials in and finished products out, the mobility of Tennesseans has improved with the greater access. We're going to have to continue to build, not just in our state, but around the country, infrastructure, roads, bridges that can accommodate that. If we want our transmission of electricity, the grid is a very antiquated system. I think a great example of what is possible is what's going on in Chattanooga. And they received one of the grants to rebuild with the smart grid, and the ability to integrate into one's electric meter all the information so that you can manage loads. I mean, you can turn appliances on and off. You can do all kinds of things that help you manage and conserve electricity as well as transmit it more efficiently. Those are the kind of projects I think we're going to have to invest in if we're going to be competitive with the emerging countries that, quite frankly, have taken a portion of the jobs that used to be here.
Where do we find the money to do that, Matt?
I think we have to make priorities. And I'm not in Congress, and it's easy for me to sit here and talk about it, but I'm one who is fiscally conservative. We've got to balance our budgets, and we have got to do the things that make us good stewards of our financial wallet. But I also think any good business person has to continue to invest in those things that are going to create earnings for them. And as I see it, if we're going to create investment returns, we've got to make the investments. And I'm not big on the kind of stimulus that just doesn't have a strategy around the return it's going to create. I believe strongly that any type of stimulus that is proposed or jobs program is proposed needs to have a goal that creates long-term returns for us. And so I hope that the Congress and the President are able to work in partnership toward that, because I was talking to a company today. I mean, companies are seeing uncertainty. They're not knowing where the economy is going. The confidence of the consumers is as low as it's been in a long time. There have got to be some actions taken to restore consumer confidence, to put people back to work, and then to help get the taxes generated that create the opportunity to take care of the budget side. I think back to, again, our time in office as a small state relative to the country's economy. We saw our corporate tax collections in Tennessee, because of the investments that came into Tennessee through our economic development recruitment and the support of our existing industries, grow to the highest growth in the Southeast and one of the highest in the country. Organic growth, not expanding the base or raising the rate, organic growth. And if you think back, we have to think a long time, to when the legislature was battling over what to do with excess tax collections in 2005, 2006, it wasn't because the sales tax had overcollected. It's because the franchise and excise taxes had overcollected because of the growth, corporate growth. I think that's a great example. We invested in education, we invested in infrastructure. As a state, we invested in recruitment, and we saw those returns, which allowed the legislature to make investments in other areas. I think that's got to continually be a part of the strategy, both at the national level as well as at the state level.
Matt, I saw a study just in the last few days that Professor Michael Porter from Harvard had prepared and delivered to the National Governors Association last February. And it was a very interesting comparison of the 50 states with each other. Basically, he plotted out on a matrix where the states ranked against each other in various ways. To be in the upper right-hand corner was good. To be in the lower left-hand corner was not so good. Unfortunately, Tennessee was all too often in the lower left-hand corner. We do have a bit of a dilemma here, because we're very good at some things and we're not very good at other things. Education would be one. If you had the opportunity to serve as governor, what would be your priorities, and how will we ever be able to be competitive if we can't have a good educational and competitive educational system?
No, you're right. Education is at the heart of everything we do. And until we value education as a state, and that means parents getting involved in their children's education and holding their schools accountable. And I think we're making lots of progress, both here in Nashville and with the initiatives underway through the Race to the Top. But that's just the start. And when we only have 22% of our population with a college degree, when nationally it's 30%, and when the jobs being created require at a minimum a 2-year associate's degree, if not a 4-year degree, we have got to get more students successfully through high school and into college. And we've got to help them, especially the ones who come from families that haven't seen a family member graduate, the tools to help them get through there. We are much more successful as a state, economically and otherwise, when we have higher levels of graduates and higher levels of educational attainment. So I've always said in every speech I gave and every talk I did, economic development and education are the same side of a coin. I mean, you can't have one without the other.
Well, interestingly enough, when Governor Haslam was here recently, and I had the opportunity to ask him some questions publicly, one of the questions I asked him was, Governor, what do you want to be remembered for? What would you like to have named after you? Usually we name things after governors for their greatest accomplishment, and education was his answer. So I think there's some hope that not only Governor Haslam, but clearly you and Governor Bredesen recognize that, and yet we've still got a long way to go. I was speaking with one of our students the other day who's from DeKalb County, and he'll be a senior this year. So 3.5 years after he graduated from high school, he's one of only 2 out of 100 graduates still in college. And that's just a small slice of the problem that we're dealing with. How do we change that culture in the state of Tennessee?
It's going to be hard because it really does start at the family level and at the school level. I mean, my opinion from my days in the legislature and my days as commissioner, but more importantly as a citizen and a father, pre-K, I think, is an important part of giving the start to families that haven't had the kind of educational success you and I have enjoyed, where those children can be exposed to a nurturing environment, teaching them the basic tools. I remember Jane Walters, who was Don Sundquist's Commissioner of Education, and someone I have a lot of respect for, said in a hearing one day, no child goes to school that first day of school expecting to fail. We create an environment that allows them to fail. They get all dressed up, they're excited, the enthusiasm that first day of school. We have got to figure out how to keep that enthusiasm and how to put in place the ways to support that student so that they don't fail, but that they succeed, and they succeed by learning what's expected of them. And that's a hard task. I mean, it takes parents, it takes teachers, and it takes communities. I mean, we're all busy with our own families and our own children and the things that we're focused on. But being involved, and I commend here in Nashville, I know Mayor Dean has taken over an educational system that was very challenged in doing some experimental things and really, I think, moving the needle in trying to improve education. I think we're going to need to see more of that kind of innovative effort around the state because so much of our education is based on local policy, locally managed schools, and again, I think back to being in a meeting with a group of mayors from an area of the state. This is back in 2004, in an area of the state that has had chronic high unemployment, and they were asking me what Governor Bredesen and I were going to do about getting them jobs. And they had done a very nice presentation that a local college had put together for them, and they got to the end of it, and they said, okay, Commissioner, what are you and the governor going to do about jobs? And I said, well, if I were doing your presentation, I would had one more slide, and that slide would have had the correlation between educational attainment and unemployment. And what you would see is a direct correlation between high levels of unemployment, chronic unemployment, with very low levels of educational attainment. So my question to you is, if we're going to figure out how to do this together, what are you going to do about helping to improve educational outcomes in your community? And then we've got something to go sell. But quite honestly, you don't have a workforce that's going to be attractive to an employer. And I'll never forget a mayor who's no longer in office of a community said to me, but if we spend all this money on educating those students, they're just going to leave and take a job in Memphis or Nashville. And I thought, well, if that's the attitude, we're never going to overcome this challenge because we're not going to make the appropriate investments, financial and otherwise.
Sure. Sure. And I think you're right. I think it is a cultural issue, and it comes down to the culture of the family, not just the culture of the state or the culture of the political climate. I remember from the first trip I made with our students to China, I visited with other deans over there, and one of the deans told me, well, you know, our culture is very different in China. We basically never stop going to school. We get a second master's or a third master's, not only to be competitive with the other 1.3 billion people who live in China, but more importantly, because when our children are in school and they have to study at night, we want them to see us studying at night. And I thought, wow, what a great statement about the challenge we face here in this country, because that is so different than the culture that we have here. And I wonder, how can we ever change that culture? Do you think we will be able to compete in the 21st century?
I think we will. I think Americans are innovative. They've got ingenuity. But I think it also is a question of leadership at all levels, and both public and private leadership. I mean, I'll never forget my first trip to China and coming back in 2005 when Governor Bredesen wanted me to figure out a strategy for engaging China with Tennessee. And some of the same observations of this is a culture that has aspirational goals to be like us or surpass us. And we really, halfway around the world, don't appreciate what they're doing in their efforts to accomplish that, and the focus on education and on training, and to send their children to the best colleges and schools around the world, and then take those schools and bring them over to China to help educate even broader numbers of citizens. I think we don't appreciate the challenge on a global basis being in the U.S. that other countries do. And I'm glad and commend you for taking students abroad, because I think it's an opening experience in really helping you to understand as a business person and as a citizen what we face as a global economy and the challenges and opportunities that that presents.
We are totally committed to that. In fact, we've just in the last year made the decision that every MBA student will have to take a global study course and see that firsthand for themselves. We're one of only 15% of the colleges of business in the United States that have made that commitment to our MBA students. And I am convinced as a dean, and I appreciate you sharing this view, that we really don't realize what we're up against in the 21st century. And you have to go abroad, especially to China, I think. Also to India. China is a little bit more graphic because they're so far ahead of us in terms of infrastructure investment and that sort of thing. Well, let me close. We've just got another minute or two. We'll have to do part 2 of this.
Sure, I've enjoyed it.
Will you come back? There's
Absolutely.
There's so many things. I'd love to spend an entire 30 minutes with you and hear about your stories about recruiting all these businesses around the world. I think that would be fascinating. We could talk about alternative energy for a full 30 minutes. I'd love to talk with you about the future of alternative energy. But let me take you back to Jackson, Tennessee, where you started. Mm-hmm. I started in an independent pharmacy that my dad owned, and I learned a lot of important lessons, which I had to be middle-aged before I appreciated, from standing behind the counter and learning how to wait on customers and that sort of thing. Take me back to your family's department store in Jackson, Tennessee, and tell me what you learned from that experience.
I appreciate the question. I enjoy thinking back because it seems like just yesterday. But our business, I was the 4th generation. It started in 1905 by my great-grandfather. My grandfather and my father had been in it. When I went into the business, literally at 6 years of age, my grandfather told me he would pay me $0.25 a day, this was in the summer, to pick up the garbage at the cash registers and take it out at the end of the day and cut down the boxes from the merchandise that had come in. And I literally learned about the business from the receiving room on up. And I think that was an important lesson, because if you're going to understand any type of business activity and you're going to lead it, you got to have experienced all the angles. The focus on the customer and how you treat your employees were 2 things that I really learned from my father and my grandfather. One is you can't expect your employees to do anything you're not willing to do. And secondly is your customers expect you to sell them something. It's just like a politician needs to ask for your vote. And my grandfather told me, you know, I'm going to date myself here, anyone can come in and buy a cricketer suit. It takes someone that has knowledge of their inventory to sell a Hart Schaffner Mark suit. And I really was, I was probably a 13-year-old when he told me that. But you have to understand what the product is you're selling. You've got to understand and train your workforce to know it, and you've got to treat people fairly. And one of the things I've always prided myself on is that our family, as a business family in Jackson, was known for treating people fairly, for giving a lot of opportunities to students, many of whom came to college here at Lipscomb, and for being involved in the community. You had a responsibility to be involved civically in our community, and there's nothing that I get more pride from that I still today can be in a restaurant or somewhere here in Nashville or around the state. Somebody comes up and says, I worked for your father, or I worked for your grandfather, and I was a college student, and they gave me my first job and my first charge account, and I'll never forget that. And tell me stories about my family that makes me realize the lessons they taught me not only were so important then, but live on today.
Sure.
it's been a great experience for me. I loved every minute of being in business with my family, and what they taught me, I think about every day.
Matt, you're a great asset to the state of Tennessee. Thanks for your service as Economic and Commissioner of Economic and Community Development. Thanks for what you've done for the state of Tennessee to help us have a better state, and great luck to you on your new venture with Silicon Ranch Corporation. Thanks for coming to Lipscomb today.
Well, I enjoyed it, and thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We've been delighted to have you with us. We hope you'll join us with our next Conversations with the Dean.